Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Hello YouTubers and welcome to another episode. Today we've got a lovely vlog planned to take us through the day on this lovely Saturday. It's probably one of the longest stints I can remember in a long time where we've had some fantastic weather to get on the water, but we haven't really been able to get on the water, unfortunately. But I think the rules have relaxed a little bit for us here in England, so maybe can get on the water as long as social distancing rules have been adhered to. But I think that's next week's exploration for future Yamsquad to look forward to. Right now, on the walk with Yam to get exploring, sniffing, getting his energy out. So let's get to it. Yam! And we've finished the stroll in the park with Bay 155.9 for 90 minutes at an average heart rate of 124. So the bottom end of Zone 2 or UT2 training for me today. It felt pretty good, pretty chilled out, and that's pretty much the end of the workouts for me this week. So pretty productive week training wise. But as I was strolling through the park, I got a question on Instagram. It was, Cam, you're a full-time athlete. How can I expect to get the same training benefits doing the lower intensity stuff that you've been talking about a lot in isolation if I'm not a full-time athlete? Well, I thought after the stroll, I might as well have a little bit of a chat about that because it is important. I'm lucky enough to be in a position that I am training full-time, but obviously that's not a position that a lot of people are in. So it's a case of, well, I might say, yeah, train Zone 2, train UT2, and then you might think, well, that's not going to work for me because I'm not a full-time athlete. So I'm going to talk about that once I've got some food, because remember, food is fuel, fueling up after a session no matter the intensity, and maybe get a shower as well. So I'll be right back once I've cleaned myself up. Okay, we have cleaned up, we're fueled up, and we're ready to go for a lovely little chat. So what I'm going to do is probably end up talking about this subject for another, 5+ minutes. So I'm going to cut straight to the point. Can you get the benefits of Zone 2 or UT2 training without being a full-time athlete? Yes, you can, and I'm going to spend the rest of this video explaining that because I really think heart rate training, Zone 2 training is a really important part of training itself. And not only that, it's what I've been talking about a lot in isolation in the videos is, yes, there's Zone 2 training, there's Zone 3, 4, 5, UT2, UT1, AT, all of those zones. And it may not necessarily be what zone you're training in which is most important. It's making sure that if you want to train in a specific zone, then you are training in that specific zone. So if you want to train in Zone 2, you're making sure you're in Zone 2. If you want to train in Zone 3, you're in Zone 3. If you want to train in Zone 4, you're in Zone 4. And it kind of can vary depending on your aims and your time restraints and all of that, which zones you'll be training in to get the best bang for your buck if it will. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get to that, as I said, I'm going to be talking for a few minutes, probably more than a few minutes. So if you want to minimize the window and let me chat away while you click somewhere else, so be it. But before we get into sort of can you actually train not full time and do Zone 2 training, Zone 2 and UT2 training are technically not the same thing, but I do use them interchangeably because there is overlap between the two. Zone 2 training is generally used specifically in heart rate training intensity zones. UT2 training zones doesn't usually use heart rate training. It can be applied to UT2, but generally it's using your lactic acid levels, your milliliters per mole per milliliter of blood in blood samples. And generally, so UT2 is 2 moles per milliliter of blood, of lactic acid in your blood or below. And that's kind of where your UT2 zones are. But generally, since people don't have access to lactic acid testing facilities or devices, we go on to the heart rate training, which is very, very accessible nowadays. So I do use them interchangeably, but don't get confused between them being the same thing. I just use them interchangeably because for me, I see very, very similar bands with UT2 and Zone 2. They are very, very close together. And also, I just want to say, just because one thing might work for me, like say Zone 2 training, doesn't mean it's going to work for you, or just because something doesn't work for me, doesn't mean it won't work for you. And I really recommend, like I've said before, trying to get as many opinions as possible, reading as many papers as you can, and then forming your own opinion based on all the information that you can gather, rather than taking sort of one person's word or another person's word, getting as many people's words as possible, and then seeing what works for you. Because everyone's their own individual, and everyone can tweak things a little bit and get the best out of themselves from little bits of variation here and there. So now on to whether or not you can train or get the benefits from training in Zone 2 or UT2 training and not be a full-time athlete. Like I've already said, you can do it. It is possible. 100% definitely is possible. And what I said before about it's your aim to get in the right zones of training rather than the specific zones themselves. The aim of Zone 2 training is to work on your cardiovascular system, your cardio base, that I'll probably talk about a little bit more in the video, and I've spoken about before, about that sort of training pyramid. If you've got the high intensity, the low intensity, the wider that base of low intensity, that aerobic endurance is at the bottom, the higher the peak will or should be able to be, or at least the stability of your pyramid should be better. So if you are close to that peak, you should be able to be more sustainable or sustain it better than if you had a very narrow base at the bottom. And this is generally based on my experience as well as some research that I've been doing. Anytime I've not done a lot of Zone 2 training, I've felt very precarious when I'm close to a PB. I've felt like if it's 2K time, 5K time, wherever it is, it's almost like I'm closing my eyes, putting my hand in a bag, pulling it out, and then it might be a great score, it might be a not so great score, and I just don't know. Now, currently, that I've been doing more Zone 2 training, widening that base, I feel more confident in my abilities to produce results that are more consistent. It may not always be the PB that I might want, but it's of a high level where I'm happy with the majority of the time rather than the minority of the time. But Zone 2 training is for building that base. And it's thought that you have to spend so much time in that zone that there's no point in doing it, because unless you're a full-time athlete, you're not going to have enough time to work in that zone, so you might as well work in higher end zones. Well, a couple of points there. Yes, for me, a full-time athlete, I can spend hours a day in that zone and not really have any issues because I have enough time to spend there. But for example, today, 90 minutes on the rowing machine. 90 minutes is quite a long time. But for example, if you had 60 minutes to spend in a workout, there isn't really a drastic difference between 60 and 90 minutes overall. Yes, there is a difference, but so say if you were training in Zone 2 for 60 minutes 3 or 4 times a week, that is still going to improve your aerobic base. It's not just going to, because I'm not doing 90 minutes, 100 minutes, 200 minutes, then I'm not going to get any fitness benefits, I'm not going to get any cardio benefits. It might just be a case of that it's going to take a bit longer for you to get the benefits of Zone 2 training or see the benefits. So for me, if I'm doing, say, 6 or 7 90-minute sessions a week, but for you, you're doing 4 60-minute sessions a week, I might just see, so the rate of progression in the aerobic base endurance cardio gains graph, so if I'm here, if I'm at the bottom and you're at the top, if my trajectory might go a bit steeper, but yours, given enough time, over time, not time during the week, but over months or years, you're still going to improve that fitness. And for a non-full-time athlete, or even just someone training at the gym trying to get fitter, you're not aiming for something that is going to, like, you're not aiming for the world championships, or you're not aiming for the Olympics yet. You might be at some point, but not being a full-time athlete, I'm obviously making assumptions here, but if you're not being a full-time athlete, then generally the goals are on the other end of the scale. It's, I want to get fit, I want to be able to run after a bus without being out of breath, or I want to be able to go and work out at the gym without collapsing, or just going through your day without being sort of really out of breath. Which also brings me to another point. People have been saying, you've not got enough time to train in zone 2. Okay? But you should train in, say, higher zones to get some more bang for your buck. You should train in 3, 4, 5 really high intensity zones instead of the low intensity zones to get more for yourself. Well, a thought about that is, so say you've got a full-time job, so say you're a teacher, a doctor, a construction worker, anything, but on the side, afternoons, evenings, you're working out in the gym, you've got your own erg, and you're doing some workouts. You're spending a lot of your day doing your full-time job, and you're coming home, and the likelihood that you want to go and do a high-end, high-intensity workout is lower. I'm not saying it's a no, but the likelihood that you're wanting to come home from work and fire out 15 500s is going to be a lot less than, say, if you've got 60 minutes, zone 2, nice and steady, keep your heart rate in that zone, watch some Netflix if you want to. The likelihood is going to be much higher to do that latter workout than it is to do the much more intense workout. And really, what I've seen with myself over time is the consistency over time, weeks, months, years, is what builds your fitness. It's not that one workout here, that one workout there that's going to be the be all and end all. So say if you came home and you were to do that was 15 500s on the program, and you're thinking, I'm too tired today. Today's work was just absolutely shattered. I just want to rest and I don't want to do a high intensity workout. So you miss that day versus your other self who does that 60-minute at zone 2. Then the next day you have a really hard day. And then I don't want to do 15 500s, but I missed yesterday. I'm going to do 7 500s. Then it's like, okay, well, you've missed out sort of 22 500s, and then your other self has done 2 zone 2 hour sessions. Yes, they may not be the 90, the 100, the 200, whatever it is, loads of time at that zone 2, but it's all about that consistency here and having the ability to actually want to get on the erg and thinking, I get to get on the erg, not pull that hard and watch Netflix or YouTube or whatever it is. That's going to be much more beneficial to the non-full-time athletes than it is to, I just smashed out a huge 40 minutes at zone 4 and then now I'm written off not only for that evening, but for the next day of work. You don't want to write yourself off for multiple days at a time at the expense of other things. Yes, obviously you're going to have hard days of training, hard days of work, and sometimes you can't really foresee when they are, but you don't want to just write yourself off for the sake of writing yourself off. And that's kind of where I've spoke about before about the differences in zone intensities. If you're aiming at cardio endurance, your aerobic endurance, there's not much point in training at the higher intensities than, say, zone 2 or UT2, because you get cardio, aerobic base endurance benefits at zone 2. You also get them higher, of course, that's for sure. But why are you going to spend more energy to get the same, if not less, benefits if you can just do them at a lower intensity. Because yes, you might get other benefits at zone 3, 4, 5 higher, like say lactic acid dealing with internal body gains or efficiency of blood pumping through the body, etc. But if you're wanting to work on your cardiovascular endurance, then why are you spending more energy on sort of only getting, say, 70% of the gains that you could have got when you're sitting at a lower intensity, which ties into that. Why are you trying to spend more energy on a workout that you don't have to, that then eats into the rest of your either day or week or whatever it is, and makes you tired for the next day of work or the next day training or whatever it is. And that also brings me into another point of sort of that grey zone training, where you want to, so even if you're in a zone 2 training block and you're doing 60 minutes 3-4 times a week and you're being really consistent, but there's Mr. Ego is back. And I've dealt with this many times, and I dealt with it actually, was that yesterday? Was it today? Today's Saturday. Yesterday, in the end of the workout with the intervals, I put some yam down in that last interval for essentially no apparent reason. Not that it wasted the workout, but it was a case of I went for my average was around 29 and then I went down. There was no need for me to go down, and that's even in UT2 zone 2 training, you're thinking, I'm feeling great, I can push on a little bit harder here, and again, why spend more energy when you're already getting the benefits at spending less energy? Which I think is the massive point. Just because you're not a full-time athlete doesn't mean that you somehow have an unlimited amount of energy. And when you're not a full-time athlete, it generally means you've got other stuff going on, and the athlete side of things usually takes a back seat. So, for example, if it is you've got another job, whether it's part-time, full-time, whatever it is, that can take priority on that day, especially if you can do sort of the proper intensity zones training and not tire yourself out for either one. So for example, you have a tough day at work, you can manage, usually, of course there's days when you're going to say no training at all, but it will be easier to do that lower intensity training. And then on the days where you either have no work or lower intensity work or less stressful work, then you can add a little bit more stress to the training to sort of balance things out. And that's kind of what it's all about. It's all about that bit of balance. And now lastly, onto the idea that zone 2 training, doing high volume, only works with polarization training. I think this comes where if you have an opportunity to do a lot of zone 2 training, and then you do a lot, say you do a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, wherever it is, and then you come into a time where it's like, I've done so much training, I've been so consistent, I'm feeling great, those zone 2 trainings are just going by without any trouble whatsoever. Then you're thinking, it's time to do a 2K, or time to do a 5K, whatever it is, time to do a test, some high intensity. And you fall over, you're backwards, you feel much worse than you did previously. Well, zone 2 training works on your cardiovascular endurance, that base level fitness. And the idea that might work on the high intensity stuff, I don't know where that might come from. And it doesn't work on the high intensity stuff. So when it comes time to doing a test, and like I've said in previous videos about heart rate training, zone training, don't go ahead and, okay, I've done 8 weeks of zone 2 training, or I've done low intensity training, and I've smashed the mileage numbers out of the park and I'm feeling good. Don't just then go 2K time. Let's go. We're going to smash this 2K. You can just take a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, depending on you again, to basically fine tune your anaerobic system, the high intensity systems, to then make sure you can get the use of your now improved cardiovascular endurance that you've been working on by doing lower intensity. Even when you're not a full-time athlete, you can periodize your year or your months or your training schedule to make sure you get the best out of yourself. Maybe your goal is to drop 5 seconds on your 2K. So say that 2K is in September, then I would recommend doing high intensity work before the 2K in September, so you're prepped for it. But before that, for example, right now, I would be saying, well, it's time to work on your cardio so that when it's time to switch up to the high intensity, then we can work on it and use that new base that you've now got as your base of your pyramid to then go up to your peak. And that's where I think a lot of people get sort of disheartened, is when they've worked really hard at being really consistent and fighting their ego and keeping their heart rate low in zone 2 training, and then go into doing high intensity almost immediately. They think, this was useless, I just spent 8 weeks or whatever it is doing this and I'm slower. If you look back at it was only a couple of months ago, not a couple of months ago, 4 weeks ago, I think, maybe 5 weeks ago, I think I ended up doing 9 or 10 weeks of almost I think maybe a bit less than that, but I did a long period of pretty much exclusively UT2 training, whether it was 90 minutes, an hour, 100 minutes, 70 minutes, whatever it was pretty much exclusively UT2, zone 2 training. And then I think 2 or 3 weeks ago now, I think it was a half hour, and it was not good, because my body was not in shock, but it was like, well, you've just been doing loads of low intensity and now you're trying to tell me to do high intensity? What are you thinking? My body was confused. But now, after 2 or 3 weeks of building up the intensity, I've done a few interval workouts, I've kept some of the low intensity training in there, like today, but also with the high intensity training combined, it meant that I can actually improve on the high intensity workouts by using the base that I have been building on to hit the peaks up here. So hopefully all of that makes sense. Let me know in the comments below what you think. If you are against what I'm saying or with what I'm saying, it's always interesting to have conversations about sort of this training. And like I've said, taking what I've said, taking what other people have said on YouTube or sort of like academic studies or wherever you want to get your information, getting as many opinions and as much information as possible, putting it together and then seeing what works best for you. And just because I'm training this way right now doesn't mean that in 6 months or so, maybe one of you suggests maybe you should try another method, and I do some research, see what works, might work for me, and then I change that up. It's always that sort of growing and building process. And as always, there's loads of differing opinions out there, and some information is not as good as other information. Not saying that my information is better than any others, but if you can get as much information together as you can, you end up eliminating the outliers that may say this is wrong or that's wrong, and then end up with quite accurate information, and then you can see what's right for you. And that will be it for today's episode, Yamsquad. Started off with the idea to vlog, and then sparked by a question of one of the Yamsquad to see, oh, I can't do what you do because you're a full-time athlete. And that's, as I think that you might take a little bit longer to get the same sort of gains, but a little bit of periodization and a little bit of consistency, and you're on to a winner, really, essentially. And obviously sticking to the right zones. So like I said, if you want to train at zone 2, you train at zone 2. If you want to train at zone 5, you train at zone 5. Not a case of I want to train at zone 2, but you look back after the workout and say, oh, I was actually at zone 4. That's where things kind of muddle up. But as always, Yamsquad, remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button. And I will see you in the beginning of next week, because that's Saturday. We've made it for another week on you. And I think before Monday, I'm going to have a couple of videos, or maybe 1 or 2 videos up on the channel that are a bit different relating to tech, because I'm doing some tech things behind the scenes and I wanted to share them with the Yamsquad and see if the Yamsquad appreciate, or if we can get other people joining in as well. So, see you in the next video.